All right, well, it looks like we've got a few people still trying to jump on, but we will go ahead and get started. So good morning, everyone. I'm Mark Tollefson. I'm the Undersecretary here at the California State Transportation Agency. With me today, I have Chad Edison, our Chief Deputy Secretary for Rail and Transit, as well as Marty Greenstein, our Assistant Deputy Secretary for Communications. So I'd like to welcome everyone to our workshop on the SB 125 Formula-Based Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program and Zero Emission Transit Capital Program Formal Draft Guidelines. I really appreciate everyone who participated in last Monday's webinar. We had over 200 attendees and heard a significant number of questions as well as comments. So we've tried our best to incorporate all of that into our formal draft guidelines that we will be discussing today. I will note, and I'm sure a number of you have already seen the document, but we do have a comparison document on our website that shows all of those changes that have been incorporated based on that feedback. So before we jump into our presentation, I do want to go over a few housekeeping items. So I just want to let everyone know that the session is being recorded. That video will be available on the CalSTA website after the workshop concludes. We will also be making the presentation and the slides available on our website. So we'll kick this off with a formal presentation, and then we will have a Q&A process afterwards. If you do have a question, I'd ask you to please submit it via the Q&A function for the webinar. We'll hope to answer as many questions as we can during this session. If we don't get to your question, we will follow up individually after the webinar. We also have a new SB 125 transit@calsta.ca.gov email address that you can send questions to or comments at any time. We are monitoring that email very closely, so we'll try to be as responsive as we can to any questions that come through that channel as well. We probably will not answer any of those during the session, but absolutely we'll try to get to those as we can. With that, I will turn it over to Chad Edison to get our formal presentation started.
Thank you very much, Mark. And we will go ahead and go through the slides here. For those of you who participated in the first webinar on the informal draft guidelines, you'll recognize some of the content on these slides. We have highlighted in red on a number of the slides where there's new content or some additional detail that we're providing here. But I'll go through this presentation relatively quickly and then take the questions that come in and are typed into the Q&A function on the WebEx. Okay, so to begin with, we'll give a formal draft guidelines overview. We'll look at the timeline for final guidelines and the submission of allocation packages, and then take questions and provide feedback. The formula program here, as we noted the last time, is from SB 125. It provides $5.1 billion, $5.1 billion in funding over a 4-year period to regional transportation planning agencies. Those funds can then be sub-allocated to projects and operators that might be managed by others. And there's flexibility to spend the funds on both capital and operating needs. We're describing the funding here that's available both through the TRCP as well as the new Zero Emission Transit Capital Program. And one thing to point out here that has been a discussion and we've got feedback on since the last presentation is that our cycle side competitive round is expected to be delayed approximately 2 months from its regular calendar so that the SB 125 regional choices can be incorporated into those applications. SB 125 funds can be used as a match in cycle 7, the upcoming cycle. And so based on both feedback and consideration that of the desire of many agencies to potentially use SB 125 choices to provide match to those applications, we would be looking at a call for projects around December 1st and applications due around March 1st. And those dates could change a little bit, but that's basically what a 2-month delay would mean. So that's one part that's new. Again, this hasn't changed, but the legislative intent that's in the bill for the flexibility and funding provided by SB 125 is to provide multi-year bridge funding for transit operators to address operational costs until long-term solutions can be identified, to assist in preventing service cuts and increasing ridership, prioritizing the availability of transit for riders who are transit dependent, and prioritizing transit agencies that represent a significant percentage of the region's ridership. In terms of eligible recipients and funding, these funds are directly deposited with the RTPAs, the same entities that receive the regional funding from the State Transit Assistance 99-313 side of things. And each RTPA needs to establish separate accounts or sub-accounts to deposit funds within and apply interest earned to the program. Those funds will be dispersed separately by fund source, so we will identify whether you're getting the money through the general fund, TRCP, through the PTA part of the Zero Emission Transit Capital Program, or the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund part of the Zero Emission Transit Capital Program. Operations funding may be distributed to the transit operators in your jurisdictions that are eligible to receive STA funding through Section 99-314. And this is also a clarification since the last time. The 23-24 funding that's in this year's Budget Act must be applied for and dispersed to the RTPAs by CalSTA no later than June 30th of 2028. I mean, most of you will almost certainly want it a lot sooner than that, but because there is the ability to apply for it and receive it as late as that date, the one thing we would clarify here is that there's no time limit on when the funds received under this program have to be expended by. So for those that are committing, some of these funds to capital projects, they have a long time horizon. Of course, we would encourage you to spend these funds in a timely fashion, but there's no time limit that is imposed by the program or by statute. The capital projects are eligible for funding here, and these are defined as the types of projects that would be eligible for TRCP funding under the competitive program. I'll go into a little bit more detail there in a moment, but basically there's public agencies that look very much like the state transit assistance agencies, plus the intercity and commuter rail services. It's quite a bit of overlap with folks that receive the normal STA funding, but there are a few additional entities that can receive it, and it can go to those entities that are constructing the projects, including construction authorities, transportation authorities, and so forth. The overall total amount of funding here, TRCP is providing $3.995 billion over the 2 years, the first 2 years. And there's a base funding level for each of the RTPAs each year of $300,000 before the rest of the funding is distributed on a population-based formula. And then in Zero Emission Transit Capital, we have a higher amount in the first year that's a mix of PTA and Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund resources. And then in the subsequent years, it's just GTRF funding. And those specific funding estimates are provided on pages 4 to 7 of the guidelines. One thing we clarified is that we will be seeking the specific transmittal instructions with each RTPA to make sure we put the money, send the money to the place that is best to get it deposited. So we will confirm that with each RTPA prior to transfer when we get to that point in the process. In terms of the TRCP projects, all projects must demonstrate a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions and increase in ridership. The eligibility looks a lot like TRCP Cycle 6. New projects are, of course, eligible. Existing projects that have previously received awards are eligible if you're trying to make sure you can maintain your federal, state, and local funding that is making that project possible. And then major project development is possible if you are pursuing either FTA Capital Investment Grant Program resources or pursuing FRA funding through the Corridor Identification Program. Something to just to mention here in terms of the demonstration of reduced greenhouse gas emissions and increase in ridership, just like in the regular TRCP program, this often happens by taking related projects and pursuing them as a strategic program of projects. And so you may have, one element that's reducing your GHG emissions and another element that's increasing ridership. Those can be packaged together into a single project and presented to us in order to achieve both of those goals at the same time. The Zero Emission Transit Capital Program is a zero emission fleet facility and in network improvement program, mainly for replacing vehicles with zero emission vehicles, doing the associated fueling or charging infrastructure, doing facility modifications or construction related to your zero emission program. And in this case, you have the CARB funding guidelines that guide some of the required materials. I have another slide on that in a moment. Your projects must reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And that can also be, in the case of operations, we'll be working to describe this more in the quantification methods that CARB is putting forward. But one of the things of the month, when you fund operations with this money, you are basically showing that you are avoiding a service cut, and that is considered just like adding new service. It's something that raises ridership and reduces GHG emissions. So if this money is used for transit operations, we'll give you the tools to demonstrate how that is happening in the quantification part of this. As before, up to 5% of this $1.1 billion, a maximum of $5 million per RTPA can be programmed for administration of funding by the RTPA or for planning expenses related to developing a long-term financial plan. That is something that we've gotten feedback both to increase that amount. We've also gotten feedback to cut that amount, and so we're trying to hear what the consensus is in terms of where we can land with this. But 5% and $5 million are what we have in our guidelines right now. In terms of the requirements for funding allocations, the initial allocation packages are going to be due in December of 2023, December 31st. And these packages need to address the projects and operations seeking an allocation of funding for at least the coming this fiscal year, but may also benefit from showing how you are planning to use your funds through the entire program period, at least at this point in time. There is a chance to update that later, so you can have an updated allocation package on a rolling basis. And you don't have to request all 23-24 funding in that December 31st allocation package. There are three main sections. There's the narrative explanation, project description, and your regionally representative transit operator data. And I went over that last time in terms of some of what's included there, and best to refer to the printed guidelines to see a lot of that detail. We'll do just some of the highlights here right now. On the narrative explanation, you're first explaining what you're doing with your other funding, in the service actions that you're taking related to that funding. Before you then describe how you're planning to use the SB 125 funding on capital projects and to fund operating expenses to improve outcomes. One thing that we provided some clarification on is that in some cases, the use of your non-SB 125 funds to increase transit operator funding may allow your SB 125 funds to target capital needs. So for agencies that are doing that, this is one of the documents in which you would describe that strategy and how you're using that to make sure that other funding sources cover the operating needs, while the SB 125 funds may focus more on your capital needs. The detailed breakdown in justification of how the funding is distributed is also part of this. And as we said before, we're analyzing and reviewing this section of your allocation package for completeness. The detailed project description side of this is where you are basically providing the information that lets us determine project eligibility. We've gotten rid of the kind of information that would be needed for solely competitive evaluation purposes. And so in TRCP, you generally are providing either the description that this is a project that's already been awarded. That's the simplest kind of project to apply for when you're putting money on an existing project, because that's already gone through the eligibility check. In terms of a new project, there's a bit more detail required here. You do need to show how you would quantify the GHG reduction, describe the ridership benefits and the priority population benefits, so that that information can be tracked and reported and checked for eligibility. And then finally, if you're doing a new project, you don't have as much quantification required, but you would still describe the reason why that project would reduce greenhouse gas emissions and increase ridership in the long term when constructed. For zero emission transit capital projects, we have a bit more detail required when you're using GGRF funds in that project. So there's we will have quantification methods, and I'll go to the next slide for this. just to provide a bit more detail. CARB has a quantification methodology that's in the middle of finalizing. It really draws from existing quantification methods used in TRCP and LCTOP, as well as some other programs. So some building efficiency and power and low carbon fuel standard type quantification that is also being provided. We've moved on from CalEnviroScreen 3.0 to 4.0, so that is the determination of priority populations benefits across the program. And for your GGRF sourced funds, we have semi-annual reporting requirements, as do all GGRF receiving projects. Finally, in the detailed project description where you're pursuing funding for transit operations, there's some detail required, breaking it down by which operators are receiving the funding, describing the ridership share that operator has compared to the total region's ridership, and then identifying the specific activities funded by the request, whether that's a portion of your service hours that allow you to retain, restore, or increase service, identification of spending on increased safety and security that's intended to provide an environment in which ridership would grow, and then identifying the expenses that you're making on other investments intended to increase ridership. We also want to see where those investments are going to benefit your priority populations and your transit-dependent riders. And then finally, this is a section where we need to analyze and review the detailed project descriptions for both eligibility and completeness. The transit operator data, nothing has really changed in this area. We described before how we're trying to use existing data wherever that exists. We're going to try to automate some of this for you, such as the monthly ridership reporting, where we will send each RTPA the National Transit Database data in a format that they can post on their website, and we'll do that each month to comply with that portion of the statute. And then there's a number of other data that's required here in terms of your revenue collection methods, confirmation that your GTFS data that's already out in public is accurate in describing your current service, and a few other items. In terms of approval and programming here, nothing. We've given a little bit of clarification in a couple of sections if you want to look at the comparison document, but as before, there will be opportunities if things are incomplete to remedy that. If specific projects are not eligible the way they've been applied for, there will be opportunities given to address that, either on that specific project or to put in a substitute project. And the other part that we would make clear here is that the state is not going to infringe on your local decision-making processes to determine which projects are proposed for funding. And then finally, you can make updates. So if you need to remove a project or add a project later, you submit an updated allocation package. We go through the eligibility check on the projects again, and we'll update the approved projects in terms of eligibility. On the process here that we're going forward with, a week from today, we have the closing date for comments on the guidelines. We will then publish final guidelines by September 30th. And we will offer a wide window of technical assistance times here for optional technical assistance as you're preparing your applications or allocation packages. And the easiest way to do that is to send a request to our SB 125 email address, which I'll put on the screen in a moment. And then December 31st, that initial allocation package and data due. Here is both our program website as well as the email comments box, SB 125transit@calsta.ca.gov. Once again, comments due by September 14th. And then we will work to incorporate feedback and clarifications based on that in a final document that will be released on the 30th of September. So with that, I've made it through the presentation, and I will go ahead and take that off the screen, and glad to start going through questions. So Mark, if you'd like to kick this part off.
Great, thanks, Chad. And it looks like we've got a few questions in the chat already. Please feel free to continue to add your questions as we go. So it looks like the first question is from Jose Luis from StanCog. His question is, Cycle 7 has been delayed 2 months. Is that Cycle 7 TRCP? The answer to that is yes. Is the TRCP and ZTCP being assigned a cycle number? I don't believe we'll be assigning it a cycle number, as this is a little bit of a one-off as we move forward. The next question comes from Sarah Kane. Is the long-term financial plan required for capital projects?
Okay, so Sarah, on that question, there's not a financial plan specific to the capital project you're submitting, but there is a financial plan required in order to comply with the program requirements of receiving SB 125 funding. So we can provide more clarification there if you have a follow-up question, but that's our understanding of your question.
All right, the next question looks like it's from Alex Clifford. If the goal of SB 125 is to provide short-term fiscal assistance to transit agencies, why are we competing with Cycle 7 and probably 8? Why not dedicate 100% of the 2 years of TRCP funding to achieve the intent of SB 125 and hold Cycle 7 and 8 in abeyance for 2 years? So this is something that would have to be negotiated with the legislature. We're moving forward kind of as statute guides us for the future cycles of TRCP.
Yeah, and I would add on that that question as well, that TRCP, the traditional program is one that comes from the continuous appropriations and is set up as a competitive program. And so again, as Mark said, if that were to be changed in the future, it would require legislative action.
All right, next question from Sam. Will the funding be deposited annually based on the allocation plan, or will it follow a structure similar to SDA, which is on a quarterly basis?
And the answer on that one is that this will be deposited as soon as we have approved projects that are eligible. It will be deposited, as infrequently as once per year. So if you have everything in and you know what you're going to spend it on and it's in the budget year in which the funding's available, that money would be made available as soon as those approved projects were submitted to us that cover that amount of money. If you only request a partial allocation of funds because you don't have all your projects determined yet, you would receive the amount of money for those approved projects. But we're not waiting to deliver this on a quarterly basis. This is not from an ongoing revenue stream that is generating resources on a quarterly basis like the SDA funding. It's instead part of the general fund or part of funds that are already in the budget from the various programs, and we can make those available as soon in the year as we have those approved project lists. So this is one of the reasons why, if you already know what you're going to do in year 2 and 3 and 4, or for some portion of that, having projects that are approved that are already saying you want to draw that money would allow you to more rapidly receive that money in future years.
Right. The next question is from Mary Dover. Is there a deadline for requesting a technical assistance meeting?
On this, we will try to provide some more clarity in the upcoming final guidelines. I mean, we provide a wide range of dates there. We're not intending to go beyond that early December timeframe, and so I'm sure there will be a request to get those requests, to ask for those meetings with enough time to schedule them by that date. So on the back end, you can ask for it any time along the path at the beginning. But I'm sure there will be a cutoff before we get all the way to December 8th if you want to have a chance of getting scheduled for one. So we'll provide more information on that in our final guidelines.
All right, it looks like we have round 2 from Jose Luis. Do allocation packages go to CalSTA or to local assistance?
The allocation packages come to CalSTA using our inbox. Using our inbox on the that is listed as the email address to ask questions. So similar to TRCP, we will use that as our inbox for receiving the allocation packages.
Right. Our next question: is there any guidance for RTPAs on developing local decision-making processes? How does CalSTA ensure that those processes are fair for all eligible agencies?
Yeah, and on this, I think we're going to have to take this into an offline conversation in terms of addressing it. So we will do our best to provide any clarity that we can on this topic over the next couple of weeks. Thank you.
All right, next question from Jean. Do projects have to be in the RTP?
So we have not, this is the first time this question's been asked in this process. The regional process is one that we would expect to be followed, and many projects will have other funding sources that may require those projects to be in the RTP. And so right now we do not have any specific requirement in our guidelines to do this, but regional agencies may have those requirements, and other funding sources may have that requirement that you might be matching these funds to.
All right, our next question from Alex. Can the ZETCP program be expanded to include low emission so we can use the funds to match a federal low-no grant application, low emission bus grant?
And the answer on this is the ZETCP money cannot be used for anything other than zero emission vehicles. However, the TRCP can be used for vehicles that are low emission rather than zero emission. And so if you are looking for projects that do this, you would be looking to use the TRCP funding on those projects.
Right. The next question, we were thinking of using the funds for a BRT feasibility study. Will this be an eligible project under SB 125, considering it's just a study or plan and no real outcome will be shown until the BRT is actually developed?
This in part depends on where this exists in your overall process of pursuing federal funds. If that BRT project is one that you are pursuing a future capital investment grant for, that may be eligible. This is one where I would encourage specific outreach around the project in question so that we can give the best guidance on how that project may or may not be programmed for funding through these resources. So it would help to have a specific example on that one.
Right. Our next question is, are Consolidated Transportation Services agencies eligible for funding?
So the agencies that are eligible for funding are the agencies that can receive TRCP funding, and you can go through the list and see if your CTSA is eligible there, and they also, if they are STA recipient agencies under 99-314, they're able to receive funding through that. They would be eligible, but I think this is an individual analysis based on both of the program eligibilities.
Right, it looks like our next question is from Alexis. These reporting requirements starting on page 17 apply to all agencies who receive either operating or capital funds under these programs. However, eligibility for capital funding is quite expansive and could include agencies that may not have this data. For example, cities, JPAs, construction authorities, etc. Is this data only meant to be reported for certain types of agencies, ICT plans, GTFS feed, revenue collection, safety expenditures, etc.?
Okay, so this is a fairly complex question. I'll do my best to address it. To the extent that you have a capital project and there are benefits from that project and you have to do benefits reporting, there could be a construction authority or a city that is constructing that project and is the implementer of the capital side of it. There are also service providers on that project that's being constructed, and in that case, you would need to work together with the service providers to provide both the estimates and the reporting of the benefits that are required under project programs like the Zero Emission Transit Capital Program. In terms of the data for the ICT plans, GTFS feed, this is mostly focused on the transit operators that can receive operating funding, and so it's not going to be relevant to a city that doesn't run transit services, although some cities do that. So I think that we define specifically which agencies need to report this, and it's only the ones that are actually have that kind of information to report. But in some cases, we have we have agencies that are going to receive the capital money that wouldn't have this reporting requirement, but then on the other hand, the operators that are going to use that corridor would. And so the RTPA needs to collect this from the relevant agencies as defined in the guidelines.
All right, our next question is from Amy. For operators that do not currently report to NTD, what is the acceptable option for complying with this requirement?
So the NTD reporting is a source of getting information that's related to the reporting requirements, and so like on ridership, that's one of the sources. I'm not sure if this question is coming from somebody for whom like the state might do the reporting for them, and in that case, the state's already reported that information to the NTD. They're not a direct reporter, but they're going through the state for that reporting. We already have that information. I guess this depends on each category that we're referring to here in terms of NTD data. But if you don't report to that, then we're not expecting you to give us that data. There may be other information, like if you don't put asset information module information into the NTD, but you have your own fleet management plan as an operator, we ask you to submit the fleet management plan and don't worry about what's not going to NTD. So generally speaking, we're not asking you to do anything other than provide an equivalent kind of report if you have it. And if that information doesn't exist for your agency, it's not something that we require in general that you would be submitting. More specificity on the question could be helpful in giving a more specific answer.
And our next question is from Jessica. Will regions be able to combine SB 125 funds for an interregional capital or operations project?
And the answer there is yes, if you want to put your resources together to do a project that crosses boundaries between RTPAs, that's definitely possible. I believe you would both submit that in your respective allocation packages, and you would explain how the two are linked. But again, because we're just looking for eligible projects here, we're not looking to define how you advance those projects in the case of something that crosses boundaries and both regions that put that into their allocation package. That's certainly something that we can work with and accept through that process.
All right, our next question from Adrian. Can you provide a little more detail on your expectations for the financial plan? And I think this one, yeah, we're happy to provide a little more detail, but if there are specific questions that you have, definitely please follow up with us after the workshop. But Chad, do you want to address that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've provided the detail on the short-term financial plan that we feel would be necessary to address. And so if there's more specific questions around the short-term plan, please request those either through sending us an email or continuing to add detail here in the chat. On the long-term financial plan, we expect to be working on additional detail on how to do that over the next year or so as we work on the update to these guidelines for the next budget act next budget year, and we will be developing further detail on the long-term financial plan. But if you have specific areas that you think you'd like clarification in, please point us to the section of the guidelines, and we will follow up by seeing if we can address that in the final guidelines package at the end of the month.
So our next question from Mary, can we include multiple projects in the allocation package?
Yes, it's our expectation that most agencies will include multiple projects. We're going to have a table in which your eligible projects are included, but this is intended to be a multiple project process here.
All right, this looks like a follow-up to the last question, but on page 20 of the guidelines, it's noted, or it notes that a reporting template will be required prior to the first annual report being due by 12/31/24. Would it be possible to get that template as early as possible so we know from the outset what data needs to be tracked?
And yes, we'll do that much sooner than, I think we will be able to get that done this fall. So we'll work on the reporting here, but we basically need to work with CARB to make sure that we give you the template that's going to be the most usable on both your end as well as on our intake end here at the state level. So we will get that done early so that you know what you're tracking.
Let's see, this next question I think we've previously answered. Will regions be able to combine SB 125 funds for an interregional capital or operations project? Let's see. Next question, is the traditional TRCP Cycle 7 and a future Cycle 8 competing in the $4 billion 2-year pot or outside the $4 billion pot? So it is competing out. So these are separate. This is separate from Cycle 7 and Cycle 8. If within, are you suggesting that RTPAs must judge the traditional TRCP applications for Cycle 7 and 8? So yeah, these are two distinct programs. All right, next question from Vanessa. If a transit operator uses SB 125 as bridge funds to close a deficit gap to avoid service cuts, can the agency still implement, let's see, still implement a fare increase while SB 125 funds are being used?
Yeah, and there's, again, we're not making those decisions for you, but you certainly can increase fares, and if that helps with your financial situation to avoid additional service cuts or to continue your service, there's no, that would be something you just, take action on and describe to the extent that it's helping you to address your financial needs during the period covered by this program. So we're not making any, we're not deciding on whether you should make a fare increase or not, but certainly if you've used these funds to do a bridge and then you also want to do a fare increase in order to improve your financial condition, you're welcome to do that.
Right, and our next question from Joel is the $300,000 base year funding for admin for RTPAs.
No, the 300,000 base year funding is a part of your total calculation of what money you receive. So it's the 5% limit would apply to whatever number you're getting, including the $300,000. So it's the 300,000 is an amount that was seen as a floor that every agency should receive. So that they could at least have just no matter how large they were. Even if they were small, they could receive some substantial resources.
At this time, I don't see any additional questions. We will hang on for a few more minutes to see if others come in. But definitely, if there's questions that come up after you have more of an opportunity to kind of read through the materials, digest the presentation that was provided today, absolutely, reach out to us via the SB 125 email box. We'd be happy to follow up with you all, but we'll give it a couple more minutes in case additional questions come up. All right, next question from Terry. When will the transcript be released? So I don't know if we'll be able to have an official transcript, but we will absolutely plan on posting the workshop, after this meeting, sometime later today or tomorrow. All right. Well, seeing no additional questions, really appreciate everyone's attendance and participation today. We look forward to continuing to work with you all. As mentioned before, if you have any additional questions, feel free to continue to reach out to us via the SB 125 email. We will have the materials from this workshop as well as the video recording of this workshop posted hopefully shortly after this workshop concludes, either today or tomorrow, but definitely appreciate everyone's participation.
And to answer the last question I saw come in while you were wrapping up, Mark, the RTPA turns in the package, so the funding goes to the RTPA for further distribution. So I hope that answers Jacob's question. Thank you, everybody, for your time today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.